This week's going to be a little bit different. The last couple of weeks, I've been preparing my Corolla to go to a drift event, which was a threes racing event at Apple Valley Speedway. I did my best to sort of document all the things that I did to get ready for the track day, and I'm going to put it into a couple of different videos, including the track footage from last weekend. So instead of just going around the shop like I normally do, this week's video is just going to be the first part of getting my car ready for the track. So it's been almost 2 years since I've taken my Corolla to an actual drift event. Back then it had a completely stock 4AG and I had no idea how it was going to work because I had never taken it anywhere. After that event, I realized that there were a million things that needed to be changed, and almost 2 years later, I still haven't done them yet. So with a drift event coming up in about a week that I signed up for, I figured maybe this was probably the best time to start taking on some of those things. The number one biggest problem that I had with my Corolla was that it has a factory LSD in it, but when I took it to the track, I realized that it does not work at all. Not even a little bit. So April 2022, which is almost 2 years ago now, one of the homies, Cole Grove, posted up a Kaaz LSD for sale out of his car, and I bought it. It showed up in this box, and I haven't even opened it yet. So today I'm going to open up this diff, make sure it's something that I can use in my car. That's the number one thing that has to be changed. The number two thing that I have to take care of before the track day is, after doing the beam swap, I removed the front sway bar because I've got my engine sitting in a more forward position, and the factory sway bar was hitting the oil pan. So I need to figure out how I can modify the factory sway bar here to get that to fit around my forward-fitting beams engine. The third thing that I need to address is that the back of the car has been bottoming out. I think the tires might be rubbing on the inside of the fender wells. Normal driving around town and having some fun on the weekends, not a big deal. This is going to be a much bigger problem out on the track when I'm actually drifting though, because I'll be driving much more aggressively. I'll be throwing the weight of the car around back and forth, and the tires rubbing in that situation can definitely cause problems on the track. Then there's some minor things that I obviously have to take care of before a track day, like I got to do an oil change. My passenger seat only has the factory seat belts, so I got some Sparco harnesses I'm going to throw in there. In our seat position video, I said I was going to raise the seat, but the brackets I have in there are up all the way already, so I'm going to see if I can't take these other Sparco side mount brackets and raise the seat up a bit. And then obviously on top of all of that stuff, I am going to nut and bolt the whole car, check the alignment, and just go over everything to make sure everything looks good. That way all I have to do is mount some tires and load everything up and go. So because we're also in the middle of our Black Friday restocking and get everything out, unfortunately I got to do all this work on the car while the machines are all running, so hopefully the audio is not terrible. If it does turn out that the audio of these videos comes out terrible, I'll just do some sort of a voiceover so you guys can see what's going on. The first thing that I'm going to go address today though is I'm going to lift the back of the car up, I'm going to unbolt the fender flares, and I'm going to start checking all that wheel clearance problem stuff. So let's go check that out. So originally I was about to film this part right here where I bounce up and down on the back of the car and I show you how the rear suspension doesn't really compress how I like, and that I think that the tire is rubbing on the fender and all that stuff. I was going to unbolt the fender flares. But what I decided to do first was actually jack up the car and just see if the tire was rubbing or not. And oddly enough, the tire was absolutely not rubbing, which is kind of odd because I definitely thought everything was bottoming out. So before I put these work wheels on, I had the car a little bit higher on the long champs, and I did think that it drove a little bit better. And I probably didn't notice that the rear axle bump stops, which have been almost completely cut off, had plenty of clearance previously. But when I just looked under there right now, I can't even get my fingers in between the axle and that cut bump stop. Let me show you. Okay, so here's the rear suspension on my car. We've got the coilover. The first thing that I checked was making sure that the rear coil had travel and wasn't bottoming out on the coilover bump stop. But then I saw this. But then I saw that. And that is the axle bump stop, which has already been almost completely cut off, almost resting on the axle. Let me try to get my finger in there so you can see exactly how close it is. So if I try to get my finger in between the axle housing and this bump stop, I can't get a finger in there. So the next thing to do is get the car up in the air, wheels off the car, and just unbolt those bump stops completely and then see how it goes. So I got the bump stops out. This should give me about another inch of travel. Let's see how it works. So much better. The only little clunk you're hearing there is actually the drive shaft now hitting the floor because the car is so low. But that's another problem to deal with. This should be way better for adjustment when I'm handling the car on the track. All right, so next on the list is me trying to get my driver's seat a little bit higher. At first I wasn't sure how I was going to do this, but then I realized that my passenger seat actually has a different set of side mounts that are a little bit taller. So I'm going to try to switch the side mounting brackets from the passenger seat onto my driver's seat. So the bracket on my driver's side is a Nagisa slider, and it has these side mounts that are probably about 2 inches tall, something like that. But on the other side, on the passenger side, it's got these other ones that I don't know what they are. Let me see. But quite a bit taller. So I'm going to take the 2 seats out and see if I can't just swap the brackets around. I thought maybe some of you guys would want to see the difference between the Evo S and the Evo L seats. So the driver's side for me is the smaller one. You can see it's actually shorter from top to bottom. The shoulder is lower. And let me take some measurements across the seat width. So we got about 15 inches there. And on the smaller one, it's about 13 and a half or 14 inches. When you sit in the 2, the S definitely feels a lot smaller. But anyway, so here's those side brackets I got to pull off and try to get the longer ones that are still in the car on the passenger side. Let me pull those out. All right, so here are the longer brackets that were on the passenger side versus what I got on the driver's side. So I should be able to replace these something like this, and it'll give me a much more upward adjustment. So hopefully that works out. Let me bolt those in. All right, so I got the driver's seat all situated. I got it lifted up, put the passenger seat back in on the other Sparco bracket. It ended up not working on my side, but worked on the passenger side. So now I got to put seatbelt on the passenger side to hold Stacy in the car. So right now the car just has a normal factory passenger seatbelt, which I don't know if I trust or not. So I'm just going to use the same 4-point harness, the 3-inch 4-point harness that I have on the driver's side. When you buy a harness like this, there's a couple of ways to mount the harness into the car. Most of the time you're going to screw in the eye bolts that they include, and the harness is going to clip in with these little clips. And then other times, like let's say for the shoulder straps, my car has a harness bar. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap the harness around the harness bar and back onto itself. I'll show you how I clip it onto the eye bolts, and then I'll also show you a cool way of wrapping up the harness straps onto the harness bar so it's not all loose and flopping all over the place. So usually when you're installing a 4-point harness, it's going to be much easier to do everything by taking the seat out first. So that's what I did. Now since it's a 4-point harness, there's 4 attachment points onto the car. There's a lap belt that attaches on the left side and the right side, and then there's the 2 shoulder belts that go back, and in this case they're going to go onto my harness bar. But before I go and do any of the installation of the belts, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the factory seat belt. I'm going to start by removing the latch side over here, which is a 17mm head. And then over here on the door side, I've already installed this harness bar, and it has its own hardware that attaches. It's actually a 16mm or the standard inch size equivalent. So I'm just going to pull that out. So again, I apologize that all the machines are running in the shop, so the audio is going to be pretty crappy on this video. But after the 2 base points of the seatbelt are removed, next I'm going to remove this 14mm head that goes up onto the B-pillar. That's currently sandwiching this harness bar as well. So this is going to come out, and that bolt's just going to go right back in again. Now the harness bar is detached. This is just going to go back in. Actually, this might be a little bit too long now. What I'll do is I'll go find a shorter bolt to replace this longer one. So I got lucky, and I happen to have the right hardware in a bin in my cabinet because I've had to do this a couple of times on Corollas over the last 20 years, and I've got a box of this shorter hardware. So one thing to note though is that because this plastic protrudes away from the actual B-pillar, there has to be a spacer on the B-pillar side of the harness bar Otherwise, you're just gonna crush this piece of plastic when you tighten it all down. So not the most elegant solution, but for right now, I'm just gonna stack a couple of washers like this. That way I can bolt it on there without destroying this plastic. Okay, got that all mounted up. Now I'm gonna take out the retracting seatbelt mechanism. This is just a 14 millimeter and a 10 millimeter M6 bolt. And then this little hook here that keeps it from falling off. One thing to look for though is that there is a mechanism that causes the seatbelt to retract here. The actual clip that was on this one was broken, so I have it zip tied together. But be careful when you remove this mechanism so you don't break yours. All right, so the latch side on the car is gonna be pretty simple. The eye bolt that's included with the harness is just going to thread into this hole. One thing I recommend doing though is adding a flat washer to it. It doesn't include these washers, but I do recommend adding a flat washer just to spread out the load of the head of the bolt a little bit. There's a couple of ways to snug these down. You can shove something in the hole and pull on it. I usually just use like a crescent wrench or something that I can grab the whole bolt with so that I can tighten it down. And if you can, you kind of want to rotate this thing so that it's perpendicular with the harness, meaning when you put the clip on, the harness can be pulled in the direction of the seat. If it's like, for instance, if this whole thing is turned this way, if it's turned like this thing is going to be binding up and trying to twist as you're pulling on it. So you want this to be more vertical. An angle like this is just about perfect. So on the door side, I'm actually not quite sure what I'm going to do yet. I'm going to mess around with this a little bit. This is a brace for the harness bar. This is what supports it. And I had this screwed in here before with a long bolt and it was holding the factory seatbelt. But if I want to use an eye bolt on that, that eye bolt's going to have to be much longer. Now I know that there are longer eye bolts that you can purchase. I just don't have one. So let me think about what I'm going to do real quick. All right, so it took me a little while to figure out exactly what I wanted to do with this. And I think I'm going to order the longer eye bolt and hope that that comes before the event. But assuming that it doesn't come, what I came up with is a little bit of an offset adapter so that I can screw the eye bolt into the original bolt hole, but then offset another stud that I can attach the harness bar to. So it's this bracket here. This is 3/16 steel that I cut out. This is going to bolt on here like this. And then I've got a stud that is getting screwed in here. And it's going to get welded on the backside. And then the shape of the bracket is designed to wedge up against the floor. So when that bar is pulled on, it actually just pushes down into the floor and gives it some strength. Now again, this is not an amazing idea. Will it work? Yeah, it'll work. But hopefully I get that eye bolt in time. Let me weld this up and bolt this in. You can see what it looks like. Okay, so the stud's all welded up from the backside. It's threaded into this bracket, so I wanted to give it as much strength as possible. Now I can bolt this on with the eye bolt. Let me do that real quick. So this isn't tightened down all the way yet, but you get the idea. So eye bolt's going to hold the bracket on. The bracket now gives me a stud. Remember, this is 3/16 steel plate, so this thing is actually very, very, very strong, even in a shearing condition with this M12 stud. And then this post can now slide over that, and I can secure it with a nut. Let me tighten all that down. All right, so here it is all bolted together. Again, make sure that the eye bolt is facing perpendicular to the bracket for the harness so that it doesn't get bound up as it's trying to rotate around. I'm probably going to put some Loctite on this guy, but I think that's going to be totally secure. I think this is a pretty decent solution for the problem that I ran into. But again, I'm going to order that long eye bolt, and hopefully it comes before next weekend. So now, depending whether or not you can access these eye bolts in the car with the seat in is going to determine whether or not you put the seat belts on now or after. Just because I know this is kind of tight, I'm going to put the seat belts on first. Now, be aware that the seatbelts have an orientation on the lap belt. There is a left side and a right side. If you look at the buckle, the receivers for the shoulder straps are obviously going to be pointing up towards the shoulders. The releasing mechanism is going to point towards the front of the car. So the one with the release in this case is going to be the right side, and the opposing buckle is going to be the left side like this. So when you lay out the harness, roughly lay it out how it's going to go. Now the angle that we put this on was so we can clip this on easily, and when it pulls up towards the driver, this is in an ideal position for that eye bolt. So in the meantime, we'll just lay the harness out of the way before we put the seat back in. Okay, once we got the seat bolted back in, now we can just run the seat belts through the side holes of the seat. The one with the buckle is usually the trickiest. Sometimes it requires a little bit of persuasion to get through. Okay, it looks like the easiest way to get it through is to push the latch so that it's facing away from the strap, and then put that end in first, and then the whole thing slides in. There we go. Same for the other side. All right, so I'm going to show you how to wrap harnesses around a harness bar. I'm also going to show you a little tidying up trick that you can do to make it so that your harnesses are not just flopping around while you're driving. You're going to start by unraveling the harness. And you can see this harness right here has the clip that goes onto an eye bolt. So the very first step that we're going to do is we're going to remove this clip. And that happens by just undoing the harness until you can slide that clip off. So we don't need this clip because we're wrapping it around the bar. Now, the next step before you wrap this around the harness is to take the seatbelt and put it through the seat. Once you get the seatbelt through the seat, then you're going to want to sit in the car and actually buckle it all up so that you can figure out about where the length of this is going to be. Now, this doesn't have to be exactly perfect, but you don't want to have to readjust the part that's going around the harness bar when you're tightening down your seatbelt. You just want to use the front adjustment. So if you're way off in the back, this front adjustment is going to be way off. It might not get tight enough, or it might be way too tight even at its loosest point. So we're going to start by just buckling all this together. So by buckling all this together, this is going to give us a reference point so that we can start wrapping around the harness bar. Okay, so now that we're all buckled up here, what we're going to do now, I have this retaining bar here, and this keeps your harnesses from sliding left and right. We're going to start by taking the buckle part and sliding it close to where the retaining bar is. So something like this. So we have a little bit of slack here, but it's not crazy. We're still making sure that we're buckled up front. Let me see. Okay, so we're about how we were when you saw the front side, and we put the buckle about right where this retaining bar is. The next thing that you're going to do is you're going to come with the harness from underneath through that bar like this. Now the next step is to take that harness and go back up into the buckle from the harness bar side, like this. Okay, now we're wrapped around the harness bar here. Now be careful, don't make this too tight here, because then it's going to be difficult to adjust the tension, and if you do have to adjust this later, it's going to be more difficult. So I would say pull it about 3/4 of an inch away from the bar so you just have a little slack like this. Now, after that's done, then you're going to take the strap and go back through the other side of the buckle, like this. All right. So now to recap, the harness comes through the seat, it goes underneath the bar, through this retaining bar, into the front side of the buckle, up over, into the back side of the buckle, and now we've got a bunch of extra slack here. So, to make it so this doesn't look terrible, we're going to feed it back again one more time through this buckle. Now this is going to be a little tighter than the last couple of times, but it's worth it. So we pull the slack out and we try to get this thing in here like this. All right, and we're going to pull this all out So let's see if you can see this. So it comes up and around the buckle and then in through this side. So now you've got 3 layers of seatbelt going through this part and 2 through this part. Now, pull the slack of the harness through. Now our harness is back on this side, which is nice. Now once you've got the harness hanging like this, go ahead and leave it. Now put the other seatbelt on and do all of the same stuff. Before you go any further, adjust the harness while you're sitting in the seat and make sure that everything is positioned correctly before you tie this slack up. You don't want to have to undo it and make more adjustments to this. But assuming you're happy with the way that the seatbelt is, then what you can do is you can just start to roll the extra bit of harness up like this. And then when you get up to here, you're going to run a zip tie through it and around to the other side. And it's going to keep the rest of this extra harness nice and tidy so it's not flopping around while you're driving. It's going to look like this when you're done. So after a long day of getting the rear suspension sorted, getting my driver's seat raised up, and getting the passenger seatbelt harnessed, it was time to close up. So the next video is going to be day 2. But besides all that, I just wanted to say thank you for everybody that's been following along. Earlier this year, when I decided to start doing the This Week videos and creating more YouTube content, I wasn't quite sure how it would be taken. But you guys have done a great job of participating along, giving your feedback, leaving comments, and even sharing some of our videos. So I just wanted to say thank you. So with that said, if you've got any ideas for other videos that you'd like me to cover, whether it's about Honda Civics, Honda Preludes, AE86s, Toyota Corollas, machining work, any of that stuff, CAD design, if you have something that you're curious about and want me to cover it, just put it down in the comments and I'll add it to a list that I'll try to cover in the next year. But thanks for watching. I'll see you guys for part 2 of Getting Ready.